From the Free Press, this is Honestly, and I'm Barry Weiss. Have you ever gone on the internet and stumbled onto combos of words or perhaps non-words? I'm talking Dogecoin, the Shiba Inu one, Hawkcoin, or Bored Ape NFT. If those things sound like gibberish, don't worry, we're going to explain. And also, it's time to start learning them because they exist in a new financial ecosystem, the world of crypto, a market that started just 15 years ago and is now worth more than $3 trillion. This new world has caught the attention of a lot of people, including President Donald Trump.
This is all common sense that we're talking about today, and Bitcoin and crypto will skyrocket like never before, even beyond your expectations, and you are the people that are doing it.
Since coming to office, Trump has appointed a crypto czar, floated the idea of a national crypto stockpile, and launched his own meme coin, as did First Lady Melania. They reportedly made $100 million in just trading fees so far. To top it off, he's taking calls from the biggest names in the business, one of which is our guest today, Brian Armstrong. Brian is a 42-year-old San Jose native who changed the nature of commerce, not only in America, but all over the world. That's because he founded the cryptocurrency platform Coinbase in 2012. It's now the largest crypto exchange in the world. To some, he's doing something as revolutionary as building rocket ships that go to Mars by bringing us into a new digital and financial age. To skeptics, he's growing an industry riddled with scammers, grifters, and even criminals.
Now, Garland underscored that just in the past month, the Justice Department has now prosecuted the CEOs of two of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges in two separate criminal cases. First, Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX, and now Changpeng CZ Zhao of Binance.
But Armstrong says stories like SBF are the sideshow, and that Bitcoin, or perhaps another crypto coin we haven't yet heard about, will prove itself to be as essential as the dollar. Today on Honestly, I asked Brian why he thinks crypto is the way of the future, how he navigates eager regulators, what he thinks about Elizabeth Warren specifically, why he was so politically active in this last election, how MAGA's America First ethos gets along with the borderless, decentralized crypto zeitgeist, and if crypto is really as dangerous as some make it out to be. We also talk about the volatility of these assets and why that makes them different from gold, or if it doesn't. We talk about DOGE, Elon Musk, Brian's recent meeting with Trump, and how the decision to keep politics out of Coinbase in the workplace was one of the hardest things he's ever had to do. I learned a lot from this conversation. Crypto is not my typical subject, as you know, and I found it extraordinarily fascinating. I think you will too. Stay with us. Brian Armstrong, welcome to Honestly.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy you're here. So Doge has uncovered a lot of insane things over the past 3 weeks. It's felt like more like 3 years since Trump came to office. But, you know, there's been like trans operas in Siberia and DEI initiatives in Kazakhstan. But I don't think there's anything that's going to stick with me more than this image of a limestone mine in Pennsylvania, where 230 feet under the ground in a cave, 700 workers process federal employee retirements using paper by hand, which are then stored in manila envelopes and cardboard boxes. And there is this incredible Washington Post article from 10 years ago about how it's basically a limestone cave version of The Office and how all these people hate each other. And one thing I've just been thinking about a lot over the past few weeks is this sort of split screen reality that we have in American life right now, which is Washington on one side, typified by this limestone underground mine processing things on paper by hand, and then this other world, which is the world of the private sector, most notably the private sector in Silicon Valley, that is lightspeed AI, crypto, blockchain, blood boys, rockets into outer space, the future, right? And these are the two largest employers in America. And now they have met inside this new MAGA Trump coalition in Washington. And I wanted to start by asking you if you think this merger marriage is working, and what you think of this sort of strange split screen reality coming into one frame.
Yeah, well, I'm incredibly excited about Doge. I mean, my whole personal philosophy is I'm pro-freedom. That's economic freedom, which is the mission of Coinbase, but freedom of speech, up and down the board, I'm pro-freedom. I think that's what creates civilizational progress. And so one big way you can get economic freedom is by having a smaller, more efficient government. So I am a huge supporter of Doge. I think it's probably the most inspiring thing I've seen in government in my lifetime. And it's kind of what you touched on, which is that the government, I think the government should be really limited to setting policy, a few core functions like having courts and a military, but they're not good at building things, right? You don't want to have the government actually building fighter jets. You outsource that to the private industry. I think we don't go far enough with that in our society. And over time, if you look at the last couple hundred years of the United States, it's the size of government measured by percentage of GDP going to government has gotten bigger and bigger. And now they're kind of running larger and larger areas of the economy, whether it's education or healthcare, banking, these things are all kind of like quasi-government. And so the US is a pretty free country, but you can think of it as a spectrum between like 100% run by the government and 100% run by the private sector. Percentage of GDP going to government in the form of taxes is kind of a way to estimate what percent socialist or communist are we, right? And it's been trending up over the last 100 or 200 years. I think that we need to cut that dramatically back. And the private industry is just far more effective at building things and running things. And we're seeing, like, if they go into the government, like you're seeing here, the amount of waste and corruption and fraud and just incompetence is staggering to anybody who's worked in the private sector.
Do you think that America was freer 100 years ago than it is today?
Yeah, I do think so. The founding, I'm not an expert on this, but I've tried to go read a little bit of the Federalist Papers and all these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, if you go back, I'd say like around 1900, I think, total revenue going to the government was maybe like 10% of GDP. And today it's probably, 3x that, at least maybe 3 to 4x that. And so we have been trending to a society that has more and more functions run by the government, and they're just less efficient. The Department of Education, for instance, it's like the test scores didn't go up and it's incredibly expensive, right? And so how do you create excellence? It's by competition. You want to have a free market of ideas where people are choosing, where to send their children or where to spend their hard-earned dollars. And competition creates that excellence to say, like, well, if there's a better product at a better price or something that I think will teach my children better, I want to have the choice to put it there. That's what's creating excellence. It's accountability through competition. The government is a monopoly. That we get the worst customer service from monopolies. Why would it be any different in government?
I think some people who are watching what Doge is doing right now in Washington are like, their minds are blown. It seems absolutely insane. It seems revolutionary. But you can make an argument that actually what they're doing is just trying to chip away and trying to return government to what had been its rightful place.
I think that's right. If you're a regulator in the executive branch and the law is unclear, you don't just get to make up your own laws. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says Congress shall make the laws. The regulators need to go enforce the laws that exist. They don't get to create new laws. And that's a good example of what we're seeing now as a transition where all of these agencies that got created and a lot of the regulations were actually unconstitutional and they need to get dramatically pared back.
Peter Thiel once said that people in D.C. are completely backwards. They don't understand any of the technology. And even to the extent that they can, it can't be stopped. Do you think that's true?
Directionally, he's right. Yes. I do think there's very few people in D.C. who understand technology. That's a pretty uncontroversial statement. And I think even when they do try to create a barrier to it, like we saw some of these AI executive order came out of the Biden administration, which in my view was a mistake. It really said, hey, you can't have more than this number of parameters in a model, which is just like, anybody who knows anything about technology knows that Moore's law, right? It's like every 18 months, the thing gets faster, cheaper, more capable. And so they were just kind of, it showed that they didn't understand how technology worked. And I think that with the release of these open source models and then countries like China putting out these models, that's a great example of where they didn't have the ability to really control it, even if they wanted to. This debate goes back to even encryption in the early days, right? Where encrypted messaging apps are now kind of like ho-hum, kind of boring everyday stuff. But
like
when they
Signal,
first started
like you're talking about things like Signal.
Yeah, Signal, WhatsApp, even iMessage is encrypted now. Where when they subpoena Apple, I don't think they have the ability to get it. There's always some debate about, does the NSA have some secret backdoor? But as a broad, when encryption first came out, people were kind of afraid, oh, this is all going to be used by terrorists and everything like that. And so it's usually something like protecting the children or terrorism is the fear mongering piece of it. But encryption is a powerful technology that just it got out there. Governments, I don't think, had fully the ability to control it, and this is good. I mean, I hate to say it in some ways, but we wouldn't have this level of progress in society if everything that government wanted to do actually stopped it in its tracks. Innovation keeps moving forward, and that's very important for civilizational progress.
So you're bullish on the idea that DOGE, led by Elon, can drag the federal government into, I don't even know if it's the future, but the present.
Yeah, I mean, this is not like dragging it into the future would be like, let's put all federal spending on a blockchain so you can have total transparency. It's an immutable ledger, corruption proof. That would be a massive undertaking because all their systems are kind of ancient. I think he's trying to do just much more basic things like, hey, let's actually have a category code on each of these payments, or make sure that payments to unauthorized recipients are blocked, and just kind of basic accounting principles, reconciliation, etc. So I think what they're trying to do is just get some of the very basic ideas working. And anybody who's worked in private industry and had to kind of go in there and clean up something in a company knows this firsthand. There's a concept called like zero-based budgeting, right? Where you come in with a fresh perspective and you say, okay, how many IT people should we have here? How many customer support people should we have? Instead of just every year someone asks for a little bit more budget because that's the default state of everything. It wants to grow in its scope. And that's a really hard thing to do, but companies that don't do it eventually are unprofitable or die or go bankrupt. And so that's the natural way that these things get weeded out in the private sector. In the government, there is no accountability mechanism like that. It can persist for decades or centuries, especially if you have the reserve currency that you can print and just get away with total lack of accountability on things. So in part, this is what the beauty of Bitcoin, right? It's kind of saying, hey, like if you're worried about the inflation of the dollar and deficit spending and money printing, there's a refuge from inflation. And I do think actually crypto is going to be very good for the United States and for the dollar because through USDC and kind of a digital dollar is going to help it maintain the reserve currency. But I also think Bitcoin is going to serve as a very important check and balance on inflationary spending and money printing.
Let's stick for a second on politics and Washington. Your company, Coinbase, invested heavily in this past election cycle, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but spending through pro-crypto PACs like Fair Shake. And I think the breakdown is something like double the amount of money went to Republicans. And the obvious question is, why are Republicans more inclined to see the world the way that you do, or more inclined to be favorable toward crypto than Democrats?
Well, Coinbase and the crypto industry certainly played a massive role in this last election. And I think that we were really tired of kind of getting beat up on the playground after school.
Who was beating you up the most?
Oh, I mean, the SEC, I think, and Gary Gensler, Elizabeth Warren were kind of unlawfully going after the crypto industry because they didn't like it, but it was perfectly legal what we were doing. So it was an example of lawfare. That was the primary example. But my naive assumption coming into business was that you follow the law and then you just get to focus on your product and your customers and that would all work out. But it turned out over the last 4 years, we got caught in some political crosshairs and some people, they unlawfully wanted to go after our industry and shut it down. And so we realized even if we didn't really focus on politics was very focused on us, and we needed to kind of get serious on that dimension. So we did, we funded Fair Shake, which is a super PAC. We funded something called standwithcrypto.org, which got up to 2 million advocates or voters in the US that were pro-crypto and wanted to support pro-crypto candidates. We tried to go and meet with the various candidates, et cetera. And so, we explicitly made a decision, by the way, to say that this is bipartisan. We do think crypto is a bipartisan issue. There's lots of Democrats who support it. For instance, like the FIT 21 bill that went through the House of Representatives last year, I think had like 71 Democrats voted for it. So it's actually something that appeals to both sides, which is good because you need more than a simple majority to get legislation passed in the Senate. But I think Republicans resonate with it from a like a free market point of view, sovereign money. There's really good national security arguments. I think Democrats tend to resonate it with it more from a equality of access to financial services, financial inclusion. I mean, it's bringing down fees in financial services, which is benefiting, I think, poor people all over the world who don't have access to good financial infrastructure, and the unbanked people in the U.S. So there's a lot to like from both sides. And then, so in this past election, it was probably like 2-1 Republican Democrat who received funding and support from these organizations and voters. In future elections, who knows? It might be 50-50 or 2-1 the other direction. I really don't know. I think it's important that we do maintain a bipartisan view in this industry. And so we've tried to do our best to help that happen.
Trump said just before the election that, and I'm quoting now, crypto is one of those things we have to do. Whether we like it or not, we have to do it. Previously, he had said things like, and I'm grabbing just one of many things, Bitcoin, quote, just seems like a scam, and I don't like it because it's another currency competing against the dollar. Why did he change his mind? Give us insight into why and how he changed his mind and who influenced him on this score.
Well, obviously, I can't speak for President Trump directly, but I'll give you my perspective as an outsider. So it comes back a little bit to that Peter Thiel quote you were saying earlier. I think that there is something inevitable about Bitcoin and crypto. We've seen now that the American people want it. There's about 50 million people who've used crypto in the US. And there's a distrust with existing institutions. I think only about trust in our institutions in the US is at an all-time low. I think it's at like 28%. If you survey Americans and ask them how many of you are optimistic about the future of the financial system, only 14% of them say they're optimistic. And so all the inflation concerns, that was a massive issue where people kind of had this deep sense that the system is rigged here. Like they couldn't quite explain oftentimes in the way economists would how this works, but they had a deep visceral sense. They were like, why is my money worth less every year? And it feels like there's these people with their fingers on the dial. And they're blaming it on some other reason, but it's really because they want to print more money and spend money that they don't have, right? And so this was a massive cultural movement, essentially, in the United States, where people said, "We want this." And Trump is a very astute politician. He sensed that there was a political opportunity here, where the Democrats had gone so hard against this industry. Elizabeth Warren came out and said she was building the anti-crypto army, which didn't make any sense because there was no coalition for that. If you come out with an anti-crypto army, there's some people who don't really like crypto.
Who would be the foot soldiers in that army? Exactly.
Like the people who aren't interested in crypto or even don't like it, they just don't
neutral.
think about it.
They don't think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But it turned out that there was a very large constituency of people who were very passionate about, they really liked, there was a pro-crypto voter, essentially. And the Democrats completely missed that. And it was essentially, for some key people like Sherrod Brown, I mean, it became like they lost their election over it. That sent a very clear signal, I think, through the Senate and the Congress in general, that like it's just bad politics to be anti-crypto.
Do you credit Elizabeth Warren for turning Trump inadvertently or unintentionally?
I mean, I credit Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler for contributing to the loss of the Democrats in the last election. And I think they may have been somebody who was a piece of that puzzle for Trump to realize that this was an opportunity.
You met with Donald Trump shortly after the election. What did you guys talk about? Tell us about that meeting.
Yeah, well, I don't want to share anything in private conversations, but, and we tried to make an effort to reach out really to both parties before the election. We could not get a meeting with the Kamala campaign, or her in particular.
Let's pause on that for a second. You run the most important cryptocurrency exchange in the world. Your company is worth, how much is Coinbase worth today?
80 billion or so, yeah.
Okay, just a cool 80 billion. You couldn't get a meeting with Kamala Harris?
No.
Why?
No. I don't know. If I were to speculate, I think she had people around her that were trying to protect her, and they just weren't sure about if they wanted to be, people to be aware that they were meeting with the crypto industry. I don't know if that was like, it's hard for me to say. I was able to get meetings with other members of the Biden administration, like lower level folks, but it always kind of felt like we were being brushed off a little bit. Like, they'd say, okay, well, this person's going to show up, and then their chief of staff would show up instead, something like that. And so they had like 1 foot in on crypto, but 1 foot out. They never trusted it. And I think they were all, it's the whole Sam Bankman-Fried thing probably scarred them a little bit too, where they're like, oh my gosh, if we meet with this person and they turn out to be fraudulent, then it'll be some huge scar on our reputation. I don't know. They were afraid. I'm not sure. That's my guess.
Like crypto is somehow perceived as like brand unsafe.
Yeah. And when they did put out messaging about crypto, it was kind of milquetoast, right? It was like, well, we're excited about innovation in financial services, and we want to make sure consumers are protected from crypto. And it's like, well, do you view it as a bad thing or a good thing, right? It's kind of like AI or the internet or self-driving cars or whatever. It's like these things, bad people might use the internet, but like on net, it is a very good thing for the world.
And Brian, when like the chief of staff would show up, what are they saying to you? Milquetoast things or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they would just kind of politely take notes and, I mean, there was actually a moment where, like Sherrod Brown, he was the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, and we spent lots of time in DC trying to get meetings with them and just be helpful, an educational resource, talk about how we get legislation. Democrats should be for regulation of these industries. That's how you clean up the bad actors, right? So we thought he would be interested in that. This was during an election year too. And I was like, okay, maybe he doesn't want to meet with me. I'm some rich guy who runs a giant company and he doesn't want to be seen mixing. That was the other issue. Democrats had an issue like meeting with wealthy people at a certain point, at least some of them. But our policy team organized this thing where we brought in, I think it was like maybe 5 or 10 different startups in Ohio that were blockchain crypto startups. So they were in his state during an election year. They flew into DC to meet with him, and then and they essentially canceled the meeting and they sent like some lower level people. And it was like, are you trying to lose the election? I don't understand what's happening here. So yeah, it was a very bizarre place they got themselves into, and I don't want to paint this with a broad brush. I think there was a number of Democrats who really got it and they really embraced it. Richie Torres in the House is kind of very helpful here. There's like Kirsten Gillibrand, Chuck Schumer was very helpful.
How about Ro
through a lot of this? Ro Khanna, I think he's said a lot of positive things about crypto. I don't have a deeper understanding of where he's at on it, but yeah, there's a large number of Democrats that are very positive on this issue. But there was enough, and then the Kamala administration or campaign that didn't embrace it.
So the Kamala Harris campaign was giving you the brush off. Then, very, very different picture with this administration, I imagine.
President Trump has said they want to make the United States the crypto capital of the world. I think he's very much leaned into that, and appointing David Sachs, for instance, as the crypto AI czar. David is very capable, very smart, and so I think we have a world now where we can pick up the phone and at least get a meeting. It doesn't mean that they're always going to do what we want. They have lots of different voices in their ears. And ultimately it has to be what's right for the American people. But at least we can get a meeting now. That is a huge change. So the access is a huge improvement.
So just to ask it one more time, you met with Trump after the election. Can you tell us anything that the two of you talked about?
He was just very gracious and thanked us for what we did in the election with standwithcrypto.org and just the Fair Shake PAC. And I think he wanted to make sure that we, along with the rest of the crypto industry, had a chance to help bring this industry back on shore, work with people like David Sachs.
Did you give him any advice on launching his own meme coin? Because presumably you met with him before he did that.
No, that did not come up. So I didn't share anything on that. I didn't actually know that was even going to launch when it happened. So
okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that, because there's many people in the country who do not pay attention to this enormous industry that you are in, but it came on their radar when Trump launched his own meme coin. And I got a lot of texts from people in my life saying, what is a meme coin? And that meme coin went from like $6 to $73 in 2 days. And that, and then that was followed on by Melania Trump also launching her own coin. Now, the vast majority of people who bought this thing at its height lost money. And a lot of people are left thinking, what the hell is this? Like, is this a grift? Should we understand this as like a fun commemorative coin? Do people think, or do you think that this actually has real value? Like, help explain this to a civilian who's kind of coming to this cold.
So I think the best way to think of this is artwork, right? It's literally like an artist putting out paintings or a song, or doing a drop. It's like some sneaker drop, like on this, in a certain market or a certain zone. And I think overall it is a good thing. Like, people should be able to create artwork and put out meme coins if they want. Now, of course, like, just when you buy artwork, it could go up or down in value, right? And so that people should be mindful when they do these things. But Trump is probably the most famous person in the world. And so if he wants to put out artwork, I don't have any issue with that. In this particular case, we didn't have any knowledge that it was happening actually before we saw the news, just along with everybody else. And then we always have this question of, well, should we list it on our platform, right? And so we really just try to have listing standards that have a minimum in terms of compliance and security for the customer. But beyond that, we don't try to make any kind of recommendations. We're not a registered investment advisor or anything like that. And so in this case, it met our minimum listing standards. We decided to list it on our exchange. And I hope that more people put out art and artists get paid, essentially. Like, the kinds of contracts and deals they've had in the past have really been, I think, punitive in terms of how they get paid. So to me, I'm more interested in the broader concept of how this could spread. And there's something like 1 million tokens a week being created now, which is like insane, the growth and adoption of it.
I want to just push back on the analogy that this is art, because when I think about a great painting or a great song or a play or movie, like it has, maybe intrinsic value is too loaded a phrase, but it moves you, it makes you think, it does something visceral. I don't see a meme coin as doing that at all.
That's fair. Maybe another way to say it would be like a collectible, right? Like a baseball card or a Pokemon card. It is a commemorative piece of artwork or something people might want to collect. But you're right. Maybe it's not like the Sistine Chapel. A lot of these meme coins are.
I think a lot of the Trump meme coin in the Sistine Chapel. Exactly, Brian.
So what's funny is Dylan Field, who's the CEO of Figma, he put out this post about CryptoPunks, where they were one of the early NFTs, these artwork or collectibles that came out. And there was a very rare CryptoPunk, which he actually compared it to the Mona Lisa, where he was like, it'll be looked back on historically as significant as the Mona Lisa, because it was the creation of this new form of art that was digital that you could own and transfer anywhere in the world within seconds, that had, provenance and attribution linked into the blockchain in a cryptographically provable way. And so, look, I don't know if I fully buy it, but I thought it was a cool thought. And it's true that a lot of the most significant art is significant because it creates a new movement or a new genre or a new medium. And so in that sense, like, I don't know, crypto art or something like that could be exciting over time, but it's still early days. A lot of it looks like a toy, and I don't want to overstate it. Some of it is kind of pretty lowbrow, to be honest.
Some of it seems more to me like the Beanie Baby craze.
If you look at a lot of modern art, I'd say that that's true. I mean, there's people who buy these things and they're worth nothing. Like, you can go buy art for $25,000, and the next year nobody wants to buy it. So that is a criticism that applies to traditional art as well, I think.
Fair enough. Jeff Koons, I guess, could be compared to the Trump meme coin, and that might be a plausible comparison. Do you think it's strange? Forget the legality. Do you think it's strange for the president to be doing this?
I was surprised to see it. So, but that kind of comes with the package with Trump. There's a lot of things that he's a very unique individual. And, I think on net, he's doing a lot of good things for the country. So you kind of have to take it all as one package.
Okay. Well, since Trump was inaugurated, the price of Bitcoin, the largest and most popular cryptocurrency, if people have heard of any cryptocurrency, they will have heard of Bitcoin. It surpassed $100,000, which is unbelievable, basically doubled in value. And more people are treating Bitcoin like a legitimate asset class. The problem is that right now, at least, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, crypto is not really usable. Like, people are still talking about use cases for crypto. I can't go into the deli, or I can't go into buy a sandwich and use crypto. Explain the gap for me. Why am I not able to use it in that way in the real world? And when will I be able to?
The main use case for Bitcoin is really as a store of value or an inflation hedge. That in alone is a very important use case for people all over the world. It's kind of like the new gold standard. And there's a whole interesting analysis about why Bitcoin is actually a better form of money than gold, or a store of value than gold. But if you want to talk about crypto more broadly, crypto is much bigger than just Bitcoin, of course. So that's a very important use case for Bitcoin. We should not underestimate that, by the way. That, like, inflation is a massive issue for people all over the world, especially the poorest people in the world. And I think most of the fiat currencies of the world are, abused and manipulated, where it really literally erodes the wealth of the poorest people in society. So if that's all that crypto ever was, I think that would still be a massive win. But crypto is broader than that. Like, stable coins have seen enormous growth in terms of just payments, and it's actually getting to a place where you can go buy things in the deli or the sandwich shop, stuff like that. I mean, I use my Coinbase card, and some of that's still going over Visa rails, but I can spend USDC at any merchant that accepts Visa with that. Brick and mortar is not going to be like the really killer early adopter use case for this, though. A lot of it is it's people in emerging markets doing cross-border payments. It's people doing B2B payments where it's enormous cost to these businesses. It is internet native applications where, like, stablecoins or crypto is the only way to pay, because that's sort of the only way you get, like, a global audience to come together online for a game or a community, is you have to use a currency that's native to the internet. You can't just use, like, one country's currency, and then how are you going to get people in India to participate or whatever. So these are the ways that stablecoins are really starting to be adopted. And then there's lots of other use cases too. I think, like, prediction markets got a ton of popularity in this last election as a source of truth about what's actually happening in the election. We can go on down the list, but crypto is many different things. It's kind of like the birth of the internet or something. It's gonna affect a lot of different industries and spaces.
But it's almost like small-minded of me to ask, why can't I go into a 7-Eleven and use crypto? Because I also wouldn't go into a 7-Eleven and use a gold bar.
Yeah, well, gold was traditionally a store of value, a hedge from inflation. So Bitcoin was that too. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to use Bitcoin or gold every day in your everyday life. But yeah, if you want to go into a 7-Eleven and use your Coinbase card, it'll work. I've done it.
One of the tensions I see right now between, like, inside of the right, and I think that this is, like, a fascinating debate watching it play out, is the tension between sort of the nationalist impulse, the nationalist populists who want a strong dollar, obviously, and want America to win, and, are very, very invested in this idea of America first. And then the nature of digital currencies, which is about, like, freedom, frankly, from the nation state itself. Talk to me a little bit about how you see that tension. And yeah, I would love to hear you on that topic.
That's a great question. So you're absolutely right. I think there's a segment of people that they're very pro-America, as I am, and many people are, but they're a little concerned about crypto in the sense that, might this threaten the dollar's dominance or make it harder for the U.S. to do sanctions? Mm-hmm. And I think it's a nuanced question. It's not a perfectly one-sided or the other, but crypto is going to be net very positive for America. And here's why I say that. First, I think America's strength primarily comes from freedom and having free market capitalism, freedom of speech, like rule of law, property rights. And by the way, these are all the values of crypto too. And so this is the only large economy in the world where if you have a new idea, you can try something. If it works, you get to keep the upside of your labor. It's a relatively free society. I think it needs to be more and more free, as we discussed earlier, but America is still that place. And what that means is that we are going to have the best new ideas created here, whether that's in crypto or AI or self-driving or rockets. It means we're going to attract the best and brightest from all over the world who want to come build something in a free society. And that's going to ultimately create economic growth. Economic growth and technological growth is kind of what creates military superiority. If you have the biggest GDP in the world, you can have the biggest, military, you can have the dollar reserve currency, right? So underpinning the dollar is really economic might. And that all comes from us being in this free society where we have to embrace new technologies and trends. We can't try to imagine if the internet had been created and we said, that's kind of democratizing the publishing of information a little too much. We're a little bit nervous about that. There were voices in the US, by the way, at the time, at the dawn of the internet, that said things like this. And if we had just kind of closed our eyes, pretended that wasn't happening as a technology shift, the big internet companies wouldn't have been built in the United States. Technology is the fastest growing, most important sector in the United States economy today. We would not be the world superpower, right? So we can't afford to ignore crypto. It is just as important as the internet or AI or any of these things. Now, the last kind of nuance I'll say on this is, I actually think Bitcoin, by the way, today it hasn't really been an issue on sanctions and these kinds of things. Like, people are 7 times more likely, bad actors are 7 times more likely to use the traditional banking system than they are crypto. The fears about crypto being used by bad actors is actually widely overblown and misreported. But you could imagine some hypothetical scenario in the future where, people try to get around these sanctions in some way that undermines the U.S.'s ability to do that. I still think that it would be better for America to have embraced crypto because it's the it's the economic argument I mentioned, but it's also that Bitcoin is going to be a check and balance on a deficit spending and inflation for the dollar. We went off the gold standard fully in kind of around 1970 or 71. I can't remember which. And, at that point, we've had larger deficits. We've had a lack of discipline. And, a lot of people have written about this, but every fiat currency that got disconnected from hard commodities eventually overprinted and kind of lost the reserve currency status. And so Bitcoin, in a way, might be extending the American experiment another couple hundred years by being that check and balance on deficit spending so the dollar can actually remain the reserve currency.
So it's like we're not going to go back to tethering to gold, but actually in the future, 5 years from now, you wouldn't be surprised if we were tethering the dollar to Bitcoin?
I don't know if we'll ever see like a re-pegging of the dollar to a hard commodity. If they did it, Bitcoin would be the right choice. I think it's more likely we'll get a Bitcoin strategic reserve, things like that are a step in that direction. But it's more likely people will just, if in times of dollar uncertainty, like let's say DOGE does an amazing job, but in 5 or 10 years, we see a return back to deficit spending and inflation, we'd see people move money as a hedge back to Bitcoin, and it would sort of create a natural check and balance there.
One of the things that makes ordinary Americans skeptical of crypto is how volatile it is, right? I think it was in 2022, crypto lost $2 trillion of its $3 trillion in market capitalization. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. And I think if like the dollar had gone through something like that, we would all be like, stay away from the dollar. How do you, but crypto obviously is siloed. So the people in your world, and certainly you were affected. Most Americans weren't. But in a world where there was widespread adaptation of crypto, we all would have felt that. And I think that scares people away from it. What do you say to people about the volatility question?
Yeah. So again, crypto is many things. If you're talking about Bitcoin, I consider it to be more of a store of value, like a new gold standard. And so, and it's also an investment. So when you're talking about volatility, volatility is not a bad thing in an investment necessarily. You actually want it to go up. For instance, every risk comes with, or every reward comes with risk in an investment. So it might go down too. But Bitcoin, you should think about it more as like a store of value. Now, a medium of exchange, like the dollar, that's something you want to be more stable in its value. And this is where crypto also has an answer with things like USDC, USD coin, which is just backed by a dollar in a bank account. So it has the exact same value as a dollar.
I'm thinking about my mom listening in on this conversation, and I just want to keep her in mind as I ask you the following question.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people will not understand in the comparison between a commodity like gold or ore or oil to crypto, because crypto is a number on a computer. It feels more like an idea. It doesn't feel like a real physical thing. Draw that out a little bit more. Explain why the comparison is correct.
So there's a lot of people out there that are crypto curious. I think the way they get started is they buy a little bit of Bitcoin. They see how it changes over time in value. They're familiar with the concept of owning maybe treasuries or bonds or stocks, or they might have a little investment portfolio or 401k or something like that. You should think about Bitcoin in that sense as just a part of anybody's portfolio, kind of like, if you go on, I don't know, Wealthfront or something, and they make a portfolio for you, some percentage of it is going to be commodities, right? And commodity, they make sense to people, wheat and copper, and it's things that we need to use in our everyday life. To your point, they're physical. Now, the only difference here is that this one is digital. And I get that for a lot of people, that is kind of a bridge too far. It doesn't feel real. So some of this is generational. I'd say there's an entire generation of kids. They're not even kids anymore. I mean, they're probably like in their 30s and 40s as well. That they're digital natives, right? They grew up on the internet, and for them, everything digital is real. In fact, moving around some paper stock certificate would feel really silly. And so when I go meet with members of Congress or people's mother or father or whatever,
like Chuck Schumer, like how is he? Yeah.
What's funny is a lot of times I meet with these members of Congress, and they'll say, I kind of get what you're doing. I don't fully get it, but my kids love it. They all have your app, and and they go talk to their constituents too, and they're like, their constituents are like, yeah, I mean, I don't really trust keeping my money in a bank. They seem to go out of business once in a while. They have high fees. They're sort of using crypto as kind of their primary financial account in some cases, right? So it's a generational thing, but I think anybody can understand it as just, it's a new asset class, and then they use the internet, right? Probably 10 or 20 years ago, they probably thought the internet was some wacky thing, but everybody can use it now. So that's part of our job, is to just make crypto more accessible, demystify it a little bit, make it trusted. These are the things that I think Coinbase as a brand can do best.
One of the things that's hurt the broad brand, I know crypto's many things, but one of the things that's hurt, I think, public trust are the people that are now in prison. And, companies like FTX, Binance, I'm sure there are other ones that you have in mind. Like, how do you overcome as an industry those kind of fraudsters that for many people who hear crypto think of SBF, and that's just like their immediate connection? Do you think that that's beginning to fade? How do you move away from it? What do you say to people who say, yeah, cool, the underlying technology here might be awesome, but the whole industry seems awash with scammers and grifters?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been very frustrating to me as somebody who's taken a long-term view here and tried to make a compliant company built in America, not offshore. Because I do feel like it's our job to try to help make the industry more trusted and to clean it up. So there's definitely been some setbacks along the way, and the industry has attracted some bad actors. I think it's not insurmountable. And actually, I think most people I talk to now, FTX is a bit of a distant memory. These things tend to really burn into someone's consciousness for about a year in my experience. And it reminds me of the early days of the internet, right? Early days of the internet, people were trying to figure out email, and they'd be getting these kind of scams from Nigerian princes. And,
a lot of our parents are still on those spam lists, Brian.
Yeah. Still to this day, there's people trying to call and get you to sign into your, pretending to be PayPal customer support or whatever. And so and the internet obviously overcame all of this, and we developed systems and spam prevention and better encryption and privacy, et cetera. So it's work in progress. Bad people are going to try to use crypto as well, just like any new technology or tool. It's like, Al-Qaeda uses WhatsApp, and they use Toyota trucks, and but we also know that there's a lot of good people in the world who benefit from those. And I think it's like 99% good to 1% bad, roughly, if I were to pick an order of magnitude. And so we got to keep trying to make it safe for everyday consumers and weed out bad actors. But yeah, I'm very proud of Coinbase's track record over the long term of being the most trusted in the space, and we're gonna keep doing that.
One of the other criticisms of crypto, and then I want to talk a little bit about your political evolution, is that it's used for just all the illicit things in culture, right? It's used for sex trafficking and drug cartels and like everything in like the darkest realms of society. And Elizabeth Warren obviously hits this theme a tremendous amount. Why is that wrong? Like, respond to that broad criticism. So like, in my mind, there's sort of two core criticisms of crypto that seem to stick in people's minds. One is the fraudsters and the grifters like SBF, and the other is that the people that really use crypto are bad, criminally people who we don't want to give access to lots and lots of money to be able to do the bad things that they do. How much of crypto is actually used for the kinds of things that Elizabeth Warren is constantly talking about?
I definitely disagree with that characterization, and I'll tell you why I think it's unfair. So to answer your question directly, Chainalysis is a company that puts out reports about illicit activity in crypto. They're an independent third party. they estimate that illicit activity is about half of 1% of crypto transaction volume. Now, that's not great, but just for comparison, the US dollar cash is about 4% illicit activity. And so by that dimension, crypto is far better. And if you look at even not just cash, which is still king for illicit activity all over the world, but if you just look at the traditional banking system, criminals are 7x more likely to use the traditional banking system than crypto. So there's no doubt that there is bad activity out there in the world, and we need to do better in terms of, helping law enforcement. We actually do a lot of coordination with law enforcement, and we receive subpoenas, and once in a while we get an award from them about helping crack some case, just as all financial service companies do. But it's important to remember that anybody sort of claiming crypto is uniquely crime-ridden they have some other agenda, because that's absolutely incorrect. The right way to think about it is that there's people all over the world who don't have access to any good financial infrastructure. Their wealth could be taken away from them at any time. It could be eroded by inflation. They can't get access to a loan. Just basic property rights is something that a lot of people in the world don't have. There's a lot of women who don't have access to bank accounts in the world. It's actually illegal for them to own bank accounts in some countries, which keeps them in bad situations. And so crypto is a tool for freedom. It's going to create good financial infrastructure all over the world. And so if half of 1% of the activity is bad and we try to mitigate it, that doesn't mean we should characterize the whole thing that way.
Brian, long before I knew anything about crypto, and I'm still a newbie when it comes to the topic that dominates your life, although I'm trying to learn more, you came on my radar because you did something really radical in September of 2020. Now, given the vibe shift, it seems hilarious that this seemed so radical. But what you did is you basically said no politics in the workplace. And if you want to bring politics into the workplace at Coinbase, you should go work somewhere else. You received a tremendous amount of blowback for this decision. And I was sort of like going back and looking at your, maybe it's unfair to say it this way, and you'll tell me if it's not fair, but this political evolution really that you've gone through, because I went back a little bit before that, and June of 2020, you sounded a lot like a lot of other CEOs and founders when you tweeted in the wake of George Floyd's death, "I've decided to speak up. It's a shame that this even needs to be said in this day and age, but racism, police brutality, and unequal justice are unequivocally wrong, and we need to work to eliminate all of them from society." So that's what you said in June. By September of 2020, you're saying no politics in the workplace. Tell me about your decision to go from someone that was speaking out very clearly on political issues, and there was a tremendous amount of pressure on everyone to do that at the time, to someone saying, you know what, we're here to do business and keep politics outside of Coinbase.
Around that time, I noticed inside the company, there was, we'd get more questions at the town hall, for instance. Usually at the town hall, we'd host it, people would ask about our products or regulation or different things we could be doing better. But we started to get more questions. This was all kind of leading up in the few years prior to that around different broader societal issues. And many of these things, I was pretty focused on our company and the work we were doing. And so I didn't necessarily have a deep opinion about many of the world events or controversial issues out there. I was always somebody who actually was not that interested in politics. And at a certain point, there became this kind of like activist contingent within the company. And it started subtly, but they sort of became increasingly strident, and they sort of built their confidence. And occasionally it started to feel like when you'd be at these town halls, it was sort of a game that some employees were playing. It was like, who could make the exec team squirm the most on stage with the most uncomfortable question, right? And so at some point I was like, man, this is kind of uncomfortable. I don't really like doing this. And there was this big moment where somebody came up to the microphone one time and they said, I want to know if we're going to support Black Lives Matter. And I kind of deferred. I didn't really know that much about Black Lives Matter at that time. And so I sort of said, we'll look into it, but I don't want to commit to anything right now. And they sort of held the mic and created this moment in front of the company where they said, that's not good enough. I need to know if we're going to support Black Lives Matter. And I declined to answer or commit to anything on the spot. And a walkout ensued of, I don't know, about 300 or 400 employees closed their laptops in protest and walked out and stopped working. And I had never experienced this before, and I was kind of bewildered by it because I thought, what does Coinbase have to do with police brutality? This doesn't make any sense to me. we kind of got the executive team together and a few people, and I was sort of asking them questions like, first of all, what the heck does Black Lives Matter even stand for? Let's see if, what this is all about. Later, I found out they wanted to defund the police and all these kind of things, but I didn't know that really at the time. And then, I was like, okay, let's put out a statement and get people back to work. So that's where that came. I actually felt like I was being blackmailed, kind of, or like I had a gun to my head in a way. Although I could have stood firmer in that moment too. I don't want to give myself any free pass here. But after we got people back to work, it really didn't feel right to me. I was like,
you're saying that tweet that I read in June, that you were kind of felt blackmailed to put that out.
Yeah. And I felt like I was being held hostage. And that was the whole point of it. I mean, this was kind of the activism that was happening within some universities, and then it eventually made its way into these companies, where I didn't notice it happening. It happened very slowly over time. And so I realized at a certain point, I was like, this didn't sit right with me. Why do we have a segment of the population of our company who thinks it's okay to stop working and serving our customers if there's something that is happening unrelated to our mission in the world that they want us to they can hold the company hostage to support their point of view if they don't like it. And so I realized at a certain point, either I need to leave as CEO because this is just not the kind of company I want to run, or they need to leave. And from talking with a bunch of people, my board and others, I realized they need to go. And I was actually failing as a leader because I was not creating clarity about the kind of company that we were all going to work in. And I was by the way, this was as I started to write a draft blog post and formulate my thoughts on this, I got some very nervous people within the company. Like, some people came to me and said, don't post this. It'll destroy the company. Like, no underrepresented minority will ever work here again. I went and talked with some of our employee resource groups and asked them about it. They gave me a much different answer, which was like, we just want to show up at work and learn and have good opportunities for growth and contribute. Like, we don't want to get involved in all this stuff either. So that was an interesting data point. And eventually I just built the confidence to put it out because I was like, I don't know. I'm not going to be, if this blows me up, like, I was going to leave anyway because I didn't like that. If this is the job of being a CEO in the 21st century, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to go start some other company. Right. But it turned out that there was a silent majority that was feeling exactly how I felt, but they were afraid to speak up too because of the cancel culture or the mob or whatever. And by speaking up, we did get some attacks from traditional media, and I think you may have been at the New York Times at the time, and so you can tell me what might have happened over there. But they immediately kind of put a hit squad on us, from my point of view, and kind of dig up some dirt on Coinbase and try to write some negative articles implying that they're a racist company or something to that effect.
Well, yeah, the playbook is the person wrong thinks, and then the hounds are unleashed to go and find anything that will further discredit you now that you've outed yourself as a baddie.
Yeah, and that was like kind of the final nail in the coffin for my losing respect for the New York Times. But actually much of mainstream media, which we can talk about if you want. But long story short, it turned out to be, I think, one of the best decisions I've ever made in the company. 5% of the company left. They took an exit package that we made for them, so it was a very win-win outcome. Treated everybody with respect. Now the company was aligned again toward a mission. We had clarity. I was fulfilling my obligation as a leader. And so I think it's a huge contributor to our success over the past 3-4 years has been being a mission first company. We've actually just executed much better. We avoid these distractions. If people want to engage in politics outside of work, we're totally supportive of that. Just don't bring it to the workplace. And we are very political about one thing, which is the mission of the company. So people sometimes they get confused, like, why are you engaging in all this lobbying efforts and the grassroots movement with Stand With Crypto? And I'm like, well, that's related to our mission of increasing economic freedom. We're going to be very unapologetically pro-crypto, including on the political front. But every other societal issue, it's okay if the employees have different opinions on that. We just try not to get into unhelpful debates at work about it.
What do you regret most about that period?
I don't regret the decision. I think, if anything, I just regret not being more clear about it earlier on in the company. Because it was just an inexperienced thing as a leader. I was walking on eggshells when these issues would come up, and I just didn't want to blow anything up. So I kind of avoided it for many, many years. And then it created this lack of alignment in the company. So that I think, if anything, I should have just had the courage to do something sooner and been more clear about it.
When you did it, I cheered so hard. It felt like such a I had left the New York Times that July, and you put that out in September. I wonder if you experienced the phenomenon that I've experienced a lot of times over the past 5 years, maybe longer, of kind of what people say in private versus what they say in public. Did you have a lot of other founders and CEOs sort of privately texting you or DMing you saying, "Thank you so much. I wish I could do the same thing"?
100%. I mean, and of course, there's a great book on this, of course, like The Private Truth, Public Lies, and the preference cascade. Once somebody speaks up and it gives others the courage to do it. But yeah, I would say that my stock went way up after that blog post. Like, I'd say multiple CEOs in the the largest companies in the world kind of reached out to me, people I had never even met, or I wouldn't have been able to get on their calendar. And they either thanked me or called to ask for how we did it and could they do something similar. So there was, yeah. I mean, just the fact that you're even asking me about this, 3 or 4 years later, it's testament to kind of how big of an impact it had.
5 years later, yeah.
Honestly, I had no idea at the time that it would have that positive of an impact, but it was almost like a defining moment of my career, which I did not expect. Yeah.
What did you feel like before you hit send on that blog post?
Scared, I would say. I always had this fear, even going back to being a kid, of upsetting people and them getting angry and disappointed in me. And I remember, I got up in front of before I hit send on it to the company and then externally, we had another town hall where I announced it, and it was one of the only times I've had trouble getting through a presentation in front of the company where I was kind of so overwhelmed by emotion, and I had tears forming in my eyes, and I was almost crying in front of the company, and I had to take a break during the middle of the presentation. And afterwards, the team told me, they were like, we were ready to, we were about to jump in and have the next speaker come up because we didn't know if you could even continue. And so I was like, this is going to cause so much hurt and upset. And I was just really afraid of hurting people, but I knew it was the right thing to do. And so I kind of forced myself to do it anyway.
Brian, there's a piece that I worked on a few years ago now with one of the most interesting, provocative, strange people on the internet, Balaji Srinivasan. And the piece was a reaction to something that Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's long-time right-hand man, had said that year. I think it was 2022 at Berkshire Hathaway's annual shareholder meeting, and I want to read it to you. He said, "Of course, I hate the Bitcoin success. I should say modestly that the whole damn development is disgusting and contrary to the interests of civilization." And Balaji's piece was extremely interesting because what he basically said was, the reason that Charlie Munger thinks that Bitcoin or crypto is an enemy of civilization is because he implicitly identifies civilization with the Pax Americana, with sort of implicit American empire and the order that it erected in the aftermath of World War II. And here's what Balaji wrote. And I've gone back and reread this a lot of times. I think it's a very provocative vision. He says this: "That order worked very well for a time. It produced peace and prosperity in the Western world. It outlasted the Soviet Union, and it gave rise to the digital revolution that's the driving force of our era. Not bad. But the post-war order is now showing its age. It's no longer obvious," he writes, "that America is a model for the world, that it should rule the world, that it wants to rule the world, or that it even can rule the world. I do appreciate," he writes, "what the U.S. once was, just as I appreciate what the U.K. once was, or what Kodak, Sears, or Lockheed Martin once were. Every great run, though, eventually comes to an end, and the world we were born into is not the one we are entering." And I've wanted to ask you about this for a long time because I do see this. I think that anyone with eyes to see would agree that the world we were born into is not the world we're living in, or certainly the one that we are entering. But the question is, do we want to sort of, in my view, what Balaji here is doing is sort of accepting American decline and saying we're on the ruins already of empire, time to try and build, from those ashes? Or is there a way to sort of harmonize Pax Americana and Pax Bitcoinia, as it were? Or are they, as Balaji says, sort of, is Pax Americana dead and Pax Crypto the thing that has to replace it?
Well, America is so important for the world, and it's worth saving. And I do think that in the last 4 years, I was pretty negative on America in terms of I do believe it was in decline. And I think that was essentially a move towards socialism and Marxist ideas being tried more and more in the US and in other countries around the world. We actually saw economic freedom in decline. You could measure it. There's different indices of economic freedom. I will say with the adoption of DOGE and this new Trump administration, which has an incredibly competent cabinet, if we can actually get rid of a bunch of regulations that are unnecessary and bureaucracy and these departments, shrink the size of government, cut the deficit, it starts to make me a lot more optimistic about extending the American experiment. And I really hope that that's the case because America is so important to get right. We have disconnected from the gold as a hard commodity with the dollar. And so what I'm very interested in is how can DOGE or the Trump administration actually memorialize some of these changes and align incentives so that they stand the test of time? Because DOGE isn't going to be around that long after a year or two. I do think crypto can play a really big role in that. Crypto is essentially returning to the founding fathers' values of America and what can make it great. Free market capitalism, property rights, rule of law, and sound money. These are the things which I think were foundational to American growth over the first couple hundred years. And if we can return to that, it'll be a huge benefit to society. And hopefully we're seeing this in places like Argentina with President Milei. That's a step in the right direction. In Canada, with Trudeau stepping down, and if Bolivar wins, that's a move towards economic freedom. I think that Bukele in El Salvador is a signal of that. We may see similar changes in the UK or Germany with a move towards that. So this is kind of the mission of Coinbase is to increase economic freedom. That's another way of saying we need to defeat socialism in the world. And this experiment has been run for hundreds of years. I think the results are in. We know that socialism doesn't work. And it's kind of a combination of people who are, with empathy, their heart's in the right place, but they don't understand the implications of how it actually turns out. And then there's other people who are proposing these ideas because they want to capture power and they're sort of abusing it. But we know that experiment doesn't work. Free market capitalism is the best way to lift people out of poverty. Crypto is the way to do it. And I hope that America is leading the charge on that in the next couple hundred years.
Okay, Brian Armstrong, in the last minute that I have you, we're going to do a quick lightning round. Are you ready? Okay. How would you describe yourself politically in a word?
I'd say independent and or libertarian.
One word to describe Elizabeth Warren.
Lawful evil.
Is there a cryptocurrency you feel is undervalued at the moment?
Lots of them, but I don't want to make investment recommendations. Bitcoin, let's say Bitcoin.
Who's the single smartest person you've met in Silicon Valley?
I hate to compare because people are going to get, there's people that are geniuses in many different ways. Someone you've had on your program recently, Mark Andreessen, I consider up there in the top few for sure.
Do you think Mark Zuckerberg's move to the right is genuine, opportunistic, or a mix of the two?
It's a mix. My impression is that he's always had these leanings toward free speech, but he was under incredible pressure. I don't fault him for that, both from government, advertisers. This is partly why Elon is so successful is he just has such high disagreeableness and he's willing to stand in he has like a heat shield and the force of 1,000 suns can be blasting on him and he just gives zero fucks. Am I allowed to say that on your program? I don't know.
Absolutely.
But, yeah. And so, I think there's many things that can make you successful as an entrepreneur, but like being high disagreeableness when it matters, which was probably, I had an ounce of that, when I did the Mission First blog post, but I'd like to, it essentially comes down to getting over your fear of people not liking you and doing the right thing in spite of it.
Elon Musk and Sam Altman have a long-running feud. You know both of them. Do you take a side?
No, they're both smart guys. I like them both.
Will the United States still be the world's hegemon in 100 years?
From a purely country point of view, I hope so. And if I had to guess, I would say yes. It's not certain by any means. It's like 60-40 type outcome. I think the U.S. really seriously was at risk of losing it in the last election, and then also honestly, like China really fumbled the ball with under Xi Jinping. I think that's another example of Xi Jinping kind of returning to more Marxist ideas, punishing the most successful people in Chinese society. I mean, I know this is supposed to be a one-word answer, but on just a quick tangent on that, I mean, under Deng Xiaoping, they did introduce more free market capitalist policies, which I think really contributed to China's rise. And they were on a path to surpass America's GDP by 2030 or something like that. Now it's looking very unlikely that'll happen. And it's essentially because they returned to Marxism and socialism. So it's just one more data point where, like, the US, it wasn't because the US was so great. I think we were like the least bad option. And China totally fumbled the ball. If America probably could have had double the GDP growth if we had not had all these kind of crazy socialist policies and DEI things and everything. It's remarkable to me that in America there are many candidates in office today who they just openly say they're members of the Democratic Socialist Party. They call themselves socialists. I think it's shocking. I mean, like Karen Bass, who's the current mayor of LA. Spent a bunch of time with Fidel Castro. If you look at her Wikipedia page, like these are just dyed-in-the-wool socialists. But there's lots of if you like socialism, there's a lot of countries you can go to around the world. They're pretty bad countries. Like America is an exception because it's not a socialist country.
Americans know that fascism is bad. We grow up learning about why it's bad. Why do you think we don't have an education or a similar education about communism or socialism?
Well, it depends where you go to school, but
generally speaking, like the average American will have a poster of, Che on their wall, but they would never have a poster of Hitler.
I think this is one of the most interesting questions of our time is why does this idea keep surfacing its head? Why does it keep getting tried when we know it's such a bad idea and it's led to the death of tens of millions of people? There's lots of theories on this. One thing people point to is that it's like the hard times create strong men sort of line of quote that goes through that. And America has just been winning for so long that I think we got a little bit complacent. There was a sense of guilt about it that we had to give back, and a lot of the attraction to socialism, it comes from this place of like ruinous empathy and actually like guilt about success. But ironically, in the process of trying to, help people on the surface, they end up hurting them and themselves even more. So that's a counterintuitive idea. Most people can't quite wrap their mind around why sharing things in a socialist economy would somehow be bad. But it elevates the worst people in society, and you lose that kind of competition for excellence.
Who is winning the AI war right now, China or America?
I'm not the deepest person in AI, but from what I can tell, America is still ahead, but not by very much.
Do you think Elon Musk tweets too much?
No, I think it's actually very effective in terms of him generating the political support that's needed for Doge.
Brian, what's the most important book you've read that has shaped your thinking, book or thinker that you'd recommend that other people check out?
There's a handful of them. I think obviously the Bitcoin white paper had a huge impact on me. I think Ray Dalio's book, Changing World Order, you hear some of the ideas reflected in my comments today. I think there's books like The Sovereign Individual, which I think were very provocative and led to some of the ideas that I'm mentioning here today. Also just books like Atlas Shrugged and, these kind of things. Some of Milton Friedman's writing was very influential on me. So that's not just one book, but those were a few.
Okay, well, Brian Armstrong, you have an $80 billion company to go and run. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.